For the past few years, I've been making trips out to Yellowstone National Park to photograph some of America's most iconic wildlife. I had already visited the park earlier this spring, but I personally felt like I hadn't handled my trip to its full potential. Yellowstone is an incredibly difficult place to photograph wildlife, and the only real formula for success is to spend as much time here as possible. That's why, this past fall, I decided to pack up my car and head to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem for an entire month. Hopefully with that much time I would have plenty of opportunities for some amazing sightings, and I could come back with lots of pictures to show for it. Since I was going to be visiting in the fall, I decided to begin my trip with a slight detour to neighboring Grand Teton National Park. The Tetons put on a fantastic show of fall colors, which leads hundreds of landscape and wildlife photographers to come visit right as the leaves begin to peak. The hype was definitely worth it, and on the few clear days I had in the park, I was able to capture some amazing landscape shots of the Tetons and the surrounding foliage. All the yellows and oranges in the leaves really made me appreciate the seasonality of the park, which is something that doesn't always last for a long period of time. I've seen spring flowers and summer thunderstorms over the mountains, but a fall morning just hits differently in the Tetons. Outside of one clear day though, it was mostly cloudy and rainy in the park. So, typical fall weather. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing though, because it gave me much more time with good diffused light to focus on what I really came here for. Wildlife photography. Fall is a great time in the Tetons to focus on two subjects during the rutting season: moose and elk. At this time of year, both species see their impressive antlers on display, as well as battles of dominance between males for breeding rights. Moose definitely proved to be the highlight of this trip, and every day I was finding new ones around the park to photograph. Initially, all I could find would be very young males chasing females in the willows of the Grand River. While it was still very cool to see moose up close, this wasn't quite the sighting that I was hoping for. I was still looking to photograph the bigger bulls that I knew were out there somewhere in the park. Finally, on one rainy morning, I saw a huge group of cars by the river which could only mean one thing. There was a giant bull. This was by far the biggest moose that I had ever seen, and he was clearly interested in some nearby females. He would smell and lick the air to see if any were receptive to him, but it seemed like today wouldn't be his lucky day. Eventually, he ran back into the willows, but with this sighting alone, I was already so happy with some of the photos that I got. Elk proved to be a bit more challenging for me. I had one afternoon near Willow Flats, which yielded a good sighting of a nice bull with fall colors. As well as a brief moment one morning of another bull chasing around his harem of females just outside of the park. I struggled to get him in focus as he was walking just behind the edge of a small hill that was blocking my shots. I was hoping that he would come out closer to the road to pose better in front of the fall colors behind him, but he seemed more intent on just bugling and letting everyone else around know that he's in charge. It's a great scene to witness, and sometimes as photographers we have to remind ourselves to put the camera down and just enjoy the moment. Luckily, the bull did get close enough for one really cool moody shot that I was happy to come away with before disappearing out of view. After getting some good moose and elk photos, I decided to follow up on some advice that I had heard and headed back to the riverbeds in the park. Here I had heard about another animal that I had never photographed and just prayed that they would pop out. Luck was on my side, and finally, after a few hours of waiting, I saw them. Otters. This family of 7 included pups from earlier in the year, and it was absolutely adorable to see them in person for the first time. The hard part about photographing otters is that they are constantly cuddling and jumping all over each other, so it's hard to focus on just one or get a clean shot. Eventually, the otters headed down to the river and started swimming, which was even more challenging because these guys are much faster than you'd think. My first experience photographing otters wasn't easy, and I was mostly just trying to keep up with them, but I did get a few photos that I was happy with. As I was preparing to call it a day with the otters, out of nowhere I saw an osprey swoop down and catch a fish right out of the river. I was so unprepared setting-wise for bird and flight photography, so I mostly sprayed and prayed for a couple of in-focus shots. I was happy that I was using my Sony A1 with its high frames per second, otherwise I doubt that I'd have much to share from this special encounter. Later on, I had a few more moose sightings that seemed to just keep one-upping each other. I had found a couple of bull moose hanging around Antelope Flats, which I was hoping would come out right in front of the mountains. Thankfully, they actually cooperated, which led to some of my favorite photos of my trip. I was happy that I had packed my 70-200 lens because this was really the moment for it to shine. I even had them cross right in front of my car, which really put into perspective how gigantic these animals are. Later on, I also had found a nearby creek where a bull moose, cow, and her calf had been bedding down in beautiful fall colors. Eventually the cow got up and got a drink, which of course meant that the bull would follow suit wherever she went. He briefly crossed in front of me, which added to the list of already impressive moose photos that I had taken. Fall in the Tetons was proving to be magical, and I was so happy that I had decided to visit at this time of year. Although I already had some amazing photos so far, there was still one animal that had eluded me for years in the Tetons. The Pilgrim Creek area has the reputation of being the best place to see grizzly bears in the park, and I would argue it's probably the best place in the world to see them. But for whatever reason, every time that I had come here, I had never seen one. Just bad luck, I guess, but this is another reason why I wanted to spend an extended period of time here. After days of searching, with no luck, finally word got out that a grizzly had been spotted down the road with 2 cubs. This was Grizzly 793, otherwise known as Blondie, who is making an appearance with her cubs for the first time this year. Most of the time, you hear about grizzly moms coming out with their cubs in the spring, so it was a bit unusual to see her with them so late before hibernation begins. At this time of year, grizzly bears are in a phase called hyperphagia, where they are trying to consume as many calories as possible before hibernation. While male grizzlies usually shy away from roads and people, some female grizzlies in the park do the opposite. They know that male grizzlies avoid these areas, and that means that their cubs will be safe since male grizzlies are known to kill cubs in order to induce females to mate again quickly. For the next few days, Blondie and her cubs stole the show in the park, with frequent roadside appearances and amazing photo opportunities. There was also an appearance one night by one of Blondie's old cubs, Grizzly 1063, aka Bonita. Fortunately, Blondie didn't seem to care and Bonita was allowed to pose for us as the most beautiful bear in the park that she is. Seeing grizzly bears and cubs was a fantastic way for me to end my time in the Tetons, and I was super pleased with how many photos that I had come away with. But sadly, all good things must come to an end, and it was time for me to begin the main phase of my trip and head up to Yellowstone. Thank you all so much for checking out my vlog of my trip to the Tetons, and be sure to like, subscribe, and follow me on social media if you'd like to see more. In the next video, we'll explore Yellowstone National Park and begin the long search for one of America's most apex predators. Stay tuned, because this is going to be quite the adventure.